Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Lissoni. I'm artistic director at Haus Kunst, and I'm delighted to host a conversation between artist and curator Nikita Kadan and Giulia Colletti, curator at Castello di Rivoli. We will be talking about A Letter from the Front, an exhibition that was presented first at Castello di Rivoli, eventually at Moderna Museo in Stockholm, and now at Haus der Kunst in München. The exhibition will be shown at Haus der Kunst until the 18th of April, and it's been extended. It's been not surprisingly, a success of audiences. That's why we decided to extend, and we wanted to, as an institution, also give a strong sign about what does it mean in this moment to cooperate and support. I should be extremely grateful to my colleague, Louisa Saip, and to my colleague, Emma Enderby, who took the challenge of following a thread of a, let's say, fast request to Caroline Cristo Baccaria, the director of Castello di Rivoli, of whether it was possible to share this exhibition or not. And the answer was yes, with enthusiasm, and that's how we started collaborating. And in less than 4 days, we launched the exhibition. We opened the space, and we enabled the audiences to encounter this beautiful selection of works, beautiful, meaningful, and dramatically talkative to the time we are going through. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Nikita Kadan and Giulia Colletti. Last but not least, I will also share with the audiences that we are recording this conversation, that we are speaking in English, besides transmitting from a German institution, and that there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of our dialogue. So now the stage is for Giulia and Nikita, and I will perhaps asking where the whole comes from. How did you decide to launch this project and to make an exhibition happening in such a short time, like just a few days after the terrifying and devastating invasion of Ukraine?
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for hosting Nikita and me, and thank you to all your beautiful team who supported us all over this weeks. I'm going to be very brief because I want to leave the floor to Nikita, who is here with us today from Venice. And I would like to thank Caroline for her, as you said, for her, vision, because, Nikita and Caroline had a lasting friendship, I can say. Everything started, and Nikita maybe will expand on this, back in 2014-15, when the SALT, the Istanbul Biennial, drafted by Caroline Cristo Baccaria, had place. In that context, Nikita had a deep conversation with her, and they shared which ended up somehow in the formalization of the work, the shelter. So they were in touch all over this, tremendous turnovers, especially in February when everything started, and they invited me to, support and establishing a cohesive, relevant project at Castello di Rivoli, a project that ended up to be A Letter from the Front, which features, beside Nikita, who is the curator of the program, features 14 artists from Ukraine, and works that have been created, correct me if I'm wrong, Nikita, of course, interrupt me whenever, way before the invasion, because the war has been going on since spring 2014 is not a news, basically. It's not new. And so these works, these moving images and this filmic work reflect different aspects of Ukrainian reality, spanning from intimacy and relation with their own past, but also traces and traumatic memories of the Second World War, for instance. So the experience, they have been so generous because they offer us an experience, a bite of this part of the world. And the narration is quite strong and cohesive. So I'm going to leave the floor to Nikita, and asking him whether he would like to, discuss a little bit more on how we built up in a very short time, kind of 3 days as well, all the program and where the title is coming from, and how you dealt with the project, and how we received all these moving images that they were stored in servers, clouds, and while you were trying to be safe and leaving the major cities, a few of them, but you stayed in Kiev, for instance.
Yeah, thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Andrea. Just answering your questions about how this show was done and how we managed to do it in these short terms. Okay, first of all, I'm not a curator. I am an artist. It's my main and only practice in, let's say, professional terms and in terms of life choice. But Ukrainian art scene, while we were there as generation, let's say, artists who started to be present, to be visible in the mid-2000s, it always missed this curatorial and institutional aspect. And we are used to organize our representation ourselves. And when we are invited by Western institutions, which seem to be so strong, we find ourselves in a regime of this, unequal partnership, which we try to make equal, using some, let's say, alternative skills from our side. And our curating, so-called curating, is about our local networks, is about how Ukrainian art communities work. I don't say Ukrainian art communities, they're different. And yeah, there are artists with whom I worked in various collaborations. Some of them curate their own project spaces where they exhibit works of other artists, exhibited works of me. In one film, I'm present as an actor, and all the other actors there are other artists of Ukrainian art scene. In the film of Antigona, I am a main character, but dancing girl in a club is Alina Kleitman, whose works are present there as well. And this brutal guy who attacks me is Yaroslav Futimsky, whose work with flag on fire is on a poster of Munich show. So these artists are really used to live and work together to support each other. And so I used the contacts which developed for lots of years. For lots of years, we are people between 30 and 40, almost all of us, very few are younger. between, let's say, 25 and 30. So the show is based on our like community network. And when I was asked to do a choice of some like video artworks from Ukraine, I already had my choice in my mind. Like I have my, let's say, quite personal understanding of what is important, which works contain some important symptoms, what works can like make clear what is going on. But then I found that part of artists who like flew out of Ukraine, they didn't have a chance to get their hard drives or their laptops. That lots of works are just online, maybe in not so perfect quality. So the war reality influenced this show a lot. It's a choice made in situation of urgency. And this is a representation which is influenced by situation and urgency in a different senses, including most basic technical sense. So
yeah, I can agree with you, Nikita, because while we were discussing how to present your work, the selection, do you remember we had I had some inquiries like, should we equalize the sounds since we are presenting a sort of marathon, or all the sounds have to be different? So reproducing somehow this rawness, this reality that we were coping with. And this was also in terms of translation, because a few of the works, they have subtitles, they are subtitled in English. We didn't feel the necessity of translating in Italian, whereas other institutions that we had worked with, Haus, Kunst, for instance, or also Moderna Muset, they were having different inquiries in terms of facilitating the public to understand or to dig up more into that reality. But it's quite intriguing what you were saying about the idea of working as a community, because I perceived that you have done this also while in Kiev, because like you lived basically in a gallery, the Voloshin Gallery became your real shelter in a sort of premonition of what your work was talking about somehow. And in that occasion, you presented a small group a small group show that is Eubora. Correct me if the title. How do you pronounce the title of the group show?
Tryvoga.
Okay. Which means basically is the hair raid siren, the sound of this.
Double meaning. Like one meaning is feeling of anxiety, and other is alarm signal, like air raid siren, for example.
Exactly. And in that occasion, you featured artists whose work is in the letter from the front, Mikola Ritny or Oleg Insai. So I would like to know more about how that worked.
Yeah, it's about this situation of urgency again, when we make certain choices, but sometimes situation makes choice instead of us. Like first 3 days after February 24, I just stayed in my apartment. I was in a quite weird, like a changed condition. I thought that this war may not last long, and maybe I'll sleep most of the time. And I was like part-time sleeping or watching movies of Ingmar Bergman. I got an idea that I should look all Bergman, and then it will stop. But then my friends, my ex-wife started to attack me with messages that you should go downstairs, you should go to the shelter, you cannot stay in apartment, it's too dangerous. And it was like each minute. I didn't know how to hide from them. And then my friends, like artists Lesya Homenko and Alexei Sai, they invited me to join them in the gallery, which was turned to a bomb shelter. And then I decided that, okay, there are my friends, and it's a nice place. It's a gallery where we exhibited several times, where I used to work with. It's a friendly place. They have some, some wine, some books on art. We can spend time in rather normal way. And I went there. But during next 2 days, Lesya and Alexei, because they stayed there with their families, with their children, they decided to go away because they made this choice. They were more and more shelling, and situation turned more and more dangerous. And I guess these days Russians were already entering Bucha and Irpin. So they left, and I stayed there alone in exhibition space. In office there was a gallery assistant and her sister and boyfriend of her sister. So we survived there together, trying to get some like hot food and all these like everyday life things, like where to wash, where to cook, and everything. But I found that in a storage of the gallery, there are so interesting artworks, including early 20th century historical Ukrainian modernism, like David Burlyuk, who was a Ukrainian artist, but who is known as like a father or a godfather of Russian futurism, and who actually introduced the most innovative artistic concept to art scene of Russian Empire. But then also he brought Russian and Ukrainian avant-garde to Japan, and then to USA. And he was like a cultural ambassador of avant-garde, of futurist movement in USA, even in post-war period. So I found works of him, works of brilliant Kiev non-conformist artists from 1970s, Konstantin Vadim Ignatov, works by Oleg Galassy, this strongest figure of this Ukrainian postmodern painting of 80s, and some works of contemporary artists. And I arranged a small group show just around my mattress. I had my sleeping place in the corner of the gallery. And around I placed some artworks. And, when you cannot go out and when you cannot influence situation so much, you need to, use your free time and somehow fight an anxiety, fight your fear.
And yeah, exactly, Nikita. I'm interrupting you because, like, I do still remember when you said, and that to me was kind of intriguing. I made this exhibition as a way to holding on to something peace related in my life, and I've never my mental health. Referring to your mental health, of course, quite increased despite everything, because you could find the time to build up this exhibition, and then in this shelter you had your own studio, so you kept on drawing. It was like as if you kind of find a sort of space for yourself, and this is quite interesting, despite the fact that you were in a sort of situation of threatened, you were threatened somehow. So I would like to you know, I would like you to discuss, if you want, more about this, especially because you kept on having plans, in the sense that prior to go to Venice, you were thinking about establishing, going outside Kiev and establishing a sort of commune with the artists, with your peers, and in a sort of way of expanding on displaced artists. And that to me was a kind of very pivotal, because in your research there is always this balance between fear and hope, which is the title of an exhibition also that you made back in 2014. So this is something that in your way of thinking is really intriguing me.
Just in January and in early February, like I was in terrible condition in terms of mental health. I was in terrible depression. And after February 24, like I got a very strong impulse of need to survive. Like after these first 3 days of like sleeping mind, like I got very strong impulse. And yeah, I felt much better, and I think I was not the only one in Ukraine who felt this. Like with the stress, with our hormones, with our mental health, sometimes it works in a like paradoxical way. These days, while I was working on Trevova show, I also like made lots of interviews because like Western media started to call, and yes, I had to say to everybody that consider it as our common struggle. It's not like your charity or like political charity addressed to Ukraine. It's our common struggle because we have a common enemy. And I said, like, close the sky. And I was in plenty of discussions, because for plenty of Western people, closing the sky over Ukraine means like the start of World War III. And they believe that if they will behave well, Putin will not cross this red line. I consider this position quite naive, with all my respect, but look at all the tendency of his movement of last decade.
Yeah.
He will cross all the possible red lines anyhow. Sorry to say this, but please be prepared. He will. So I spoke with press, and also I started to draw. I started to make drawings, and I was like hyperactive. And then, and we did a letter from the front.
Exactly.
And then Lesya Homenko, actually one who invited me to come to Voloshin Gallery, she initiated residence for internally displaced artists in the west of the country, in the city of Ivano-Frankivsk. Ivano-Frankivsk is known as a gate to Carpathian Mountains. Like all people who go like skiing, who go for all this Carpathian tourism, we have this super beautiful, not so high, but very beautiful mountains in the west. They go through Ivano-Frankivsk. And there is a small institution, Assortimentna Kimnata, with its initiators, Alena Karavai and Anna Potemkina, who gave us all the support. Also, they did a lot for saving artworks from the different parts of Ukraine, bringing them to the West. They are like real cultural heroes of Ukraine. And Lesya and they initiated a residence, and they proposed me to join, and also to join curating of it. So Lesya moved to Poland with her family to do the paintings for our common show in Venice. By the way, now I'm speaking from Venice because Ministry of Culture of Ukraine decided to bring me here because it's somehow important for Ukrainian cultural diplomacy in their understanding. And I'll be installing my work here for a Ukrainian show in Scola di Misericordia, which will open on 21st of April, and then go to Brussels where will be big Ukrainian show in Bozar. And then I have to go back to Ukraine because I have this, like temporary permit to go out. So I went to Ivano-Frankivsk and I started to work with all these, like around 15 of artists, and there will be more who joined the residence. They are from different parts of Ukraine, from Mariupol, from Lugansk region, also like people from Kiev, people from different places. And we got a studio from Assortimentna Kimnata, and also they rented a house in Carpathian Mountains, and we'll work there, and we have our like discussion room, and we just started, but I have a feeling that this project is for long.
So it's a lasting project. I would like to ask you just one more question, and then I leave to Andrea, who is nice, who is here, because like I want to get back again on your drawings, because you said I started drawing in the gallery. I established a small studio where I could focus on my drawings, and it really it strikes to me your modernist skulls, right, that you depicted, and what you the notion of save Ukrainian Soviet modernism that you are expanding on with other artists as well, right? I didn't know about this movement, which is mostly a young people movement recently emerged in Ukraine. And it's quite intriguing because like the Sovmod, as you call it, and as it's called, is referring to the Soviet architecture of the 60s, 80s that has been brutally destroyed or reconstructed for mostly commercial purposes in today's Ukraine. But there are many paradoxes here, which is something that in your practice I do love. So I'm painting the paradoxes of history, which is something that you have been doing for a while. And the paradox is like that in the Soviet Union, these buildings, this architecture has never been called modernist. So it's something related to the Ukrainian way of considering architecture and monumental art, but it's also like related to an historicist way, something related to the past. Now, I do find this very related to the Sovmod, and your research on the War of Monuments that you have been, working on since years right now. I was saying I find it quite related to this idea of iconoclasm and removal, protection of monuments, like the ones that you showed us on Instagram. Because, for instance, you put a post, you posted on the monument of the painter Ilva Repin in front of the National Museum in Kiev Art Gallery, which used to be the Kiev National Museum of Russian Art, and maybe the biggest museum collection of Russian art outside of Russia, and how this has been paradoxically endangered by the army and protected by the Ukrainians. And so did happen as well for the monument in Kremenets of the Second World War that has been destroyed by the army, and which was supposed to protect, among other things, the Soviet monuments. So all this kind of paradox of the war, in terms of removal, trauma, and memory. It's something that really struck me in your practice and in your exposing this to your Instagram account, which became a sort of diary as well.
Yeah, thank you. Your question sounds like almost as complex as the theme. I deal with these paradoxes of politics of memory after 2004, and this work with Soviet modernism skulls is about what is going on after 2015, because then we got something called politics of decommunization. And like after Maidan protests and escape of pro-Russian and extremely corrupted and guilty in a killing of protesters, President Yanukovych, like new Ukrainian government started to destroy Soviet symbolics, change the names of the streets, and erase the memory of Soviet era. One could understand it from that point of view that during Soviet period, like millions of Ukrainians were killed or repressed. And that Soviet project definitely had this colonial aspect. To make things clear, I am not in this model describing post-socialist through post-colonial lens. It's more complicated. I feel that we can use rather decolonial optics here. And we should take into account this universalist aspect of a communist project. And the paradox is that while new, like post-Maidan, post-2014 Ukraine gets rid of colonial influence through, like between other, through this decommunization, through state anti-communism. Same time, Putin is an anti-communist as well. Putin's ideology is anti-revolutionary. It uses certain aspects of Soviet legacy. It uses some like neo-Stalinist rhetorics or like post-Cold War rhetorics. But Putinism is a form of anti-communism. And Putin's ideology is essentially anti-revolutionary. Also, we could take into account that a lot of authors of Ukrainian art of 60s, 70s, 80s were like in parallel in a Soviet art and architecture which was allowed and protected and supported by the state, like Alagorska, who made these huge monumental works, like for example in a museum of anti-fascist resistance in Krasnodon. But also she was killed by KGB for being Ukrainian dissident and human rights activist. Or Florian Yuriev, whose family was oppressed by Stalinism, who made these like anti-Stalinist and in fact anti-Soviet works through like 60s, 70s, 80s. He didn't exhibit them in public, but he was prominent Soviet architecture who could build like very important buildings like this well-known Kiev UFO building, which is one of the symbol of this post-war Soviet architecture. They were enemies of Soviet system, but same time they were parts of it. And now their type of practice is described as Soviet modernism, but in Soviet Union, word modernism never was used in a positive context. It was like a political pejorative. And somehow I found that all this Soviet anti-modernist propaganda, like plenty of books which were like art history books, but at the same time political propaganda books against Western modernism. They use the skulls from Picasso's paintings and drawings as like symbols of this modernism and ugliness, modernist anti-humanism. And now I thought about the skulls as like protective fetishes, which could protect these modernist buildings from ruining. But while they were ruining, like by Ukrainian state or private developers for 8 years, now they are ruined by Russian missiles. And in a night of intervening to Ukraine, Putin made some pseudo-historical lecture on Russian TV. And by the way, he told that Russia should protect like Soviet heritage and heritage of World War II commemoration on Ukrainian territory, and also like protect Russian language, Russian culture, and so on. But when they enter, they destroy Soviet monuments to World War II. They destroyed buildings created by prominent Russian architects during Russian Empire, during Soviet period. And there are a lot of Russian cultural heritage in Ukraine, and now it's endangered from the side of barbarian Russian army. And so, yeah, some Ukrainian like cultural actors, they call for like boycott of Russian culture in general. I have rather more moderate position. I am for boycotting any collaboration with Russian state-run institutions and with Russian corporate money. You may know that even during annexation of Crimea, heads of biggest Russian museums signed the letter of support of politics of Vladimir Putin. And some oligarchs who actually invite good international art professionals to run this huge strong, if we speak in purely professional terms, art centers in Moscow or St. Petersburg. They are the pockets of Putin's war machine. So I am calling for boycott of Russian state institutions and corporate money. But you know, lots of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian cultural actors, they have this rather justified anger, calling for like total boycott of what is called Russian culture in general. But I'm thinking rather about Ukrainians who protect Russian culture from Russian army and Russian state.
Thank you for such a strong statement, Nikita. It's. I think it will stay with everyone who is now listening, and it resonates also with the exchange you had with Caroline when you mentioned the fact that you took the decision of not being part of Diversity United, that show that goes under the patronage of Macron and Steinmeier and Putin, that you may don't necessarily know had a huge resonance in Germany in the last months because of the scandal of the Kunsthalle Berlin being, let's say, backed by the very same, let's say, financial oligarchy, German financial oligarchy, and has been a huge, beautiful movement of artists who decided to withdraw from the show. You just already decided not to take part in the beginning. So that's something admirable and important. I mean, it also says so much about what an artist can do and what does it mean to be an artist today. Also, like giving up, saying no, it's fundamental. But I would like to ask you something completely different and connected. You use the word protection a lot in your, let's say, in these sentences you share with us. And actually, I will quote a sentence that stayed with me from Lucid Skin, which is, I would like to make my borders permutable, to lend its protection to the others. It's really stayed with me. And it stayed with me also because the context is what the context of the dance floor, right? Around the ecstatic stage of the dance floor. And I wanted to ask you, why did you write this? And what did you mean with this? Then it continues in a beautiful way, and it mentioned also surrendering defenses and lending them over. And then it continues also by, if you lose something at one place, it doesn't mean it appears in another one. So I'm just picking questions, sentences that you, as an actor, as a character, mention in this video. But I wanted to ask about protection and body and borders.
Yeah, I wrote this text in a rather poetic manner, and there were really lots of things behind, like about dealing with feeling of guilt, with privileged position, and with understanding that you are in a better position than others, but you doesn't deserve more than others. And by the way, it's about my current being in Venice for a certain period. I feel this, survivor syndrome, how we should call it. I feel it now quite strongly. So I wrote these few poetic fragments, and artist Antigona, she built her scenario on my text and some like story from life, and yeah, because all this scene in a nightclub, it's what happened in reality, really. So if we return to this like giving skin away, like trying to give your protective borders to others, it could be interpreted like imagine the body in which some organs are protected and some are rather outside of this body wholeness or they are less protected than others, like like breast or testicles or eyes, like what is a more like vulnerable, fragile, less protected. And if we could speak about situation of like European common body, Ukraine is such a part which is a bit aside and which is very fragile in a situation of attack on this body.
I would like to hook to a video, and I should also say that part of the works that are shown at Haus Kunst are available still on the website of Castello di Rivoli, so can be seen by a broader audience. And I would like to hook to this, to me, surprising but also wonderful video, which is dedicated to the youth of the World II. Surprising because I was really touched that you wanted to present it in the selection, because it looks not having anything to do, because it's like basically impeccable, let's say, journey into an episode of rave culture, but it's split in two. And as you were saying, I felt a strong symptom in that second part, when the youth leaves the club, the rave, and just is a kind of collective body, but in a situation of waiting, suspended. And this waiting, it's kind of terrorizing. It's really like nothing that puts you in a comfortable situation. And I was wondering whether you want to expand on this, or what is your feeling about that moment of, suspension that is exactly what I felt you were describing when talking about bodies and protection and state of separation.
Really, if we speak about lucid skin as one of the works from this bigger selection, we could find the connection with others, like a work of Hime and Malashak, like dedicated to the use of the world, is also about rave culture. The strong development of Kiev techno scene happened after the start of the war. It was some like a reaction of society to this, like we don't want to be in a situation when we are only the victims. We want something more. We'll defend our right to like happy life. And this aspect of this fragility and hypersensitivity, it's mirrored in a film of Katya Lipkind, like the dialogue with her dead grandma. Yeah, and see the works of artists who like are actors in a lucid skin, like Alina Kleitman, with her like poetics of overcoming personal trauma, or Yaroslav Futimsky, who is an artist and anarchist activist. He's a performer and author of videos and like traveler person, not so easy to find. And he's in a struggle for all his life but escape is also the method of struggle. He never was too social, or a bit like this ascetic figure of new hermit, like very anarchist figure, in fact. And now he's in this Food Not Bombs initiative, cooking food for plenty of internal refugees in Lviv. He's totally engaged in a very, very practical things for the people who lost their homes, helping them in a very, very basic needs. You can really find a lot of hidden connections in these works.
Well, thank you for saying this, because this is one question we got in the last weeks, repeated and repeated again, was from the audiences was, but why are these work of even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and 4 years ago, and is there anything has been made now? And like beside the sometimes naive, let's say, image of someone being able to make a work now, we always answer this is an incredible opportunity to see the symptoms, to check what is the territorial representation, the intimate territorial representation of a landscape that artists have been depicting better as anyone else. And I also mentioned the tragedy of the filmmaker that was killed a week ago, and how important it is to be engaged in witnessing through work and being aware. And our impression in this selection in A Letter from the Front, if there is so much sense of trembling, of symptoms, of glimpses of something that may happen and actually happening. So this doesn't want to be a conclusion. One only wants to be a acknowledgement and let's say a sort of hopefully also inspiration for all those that do not necessarily pretend to be curators, but are like making communities, which is definitely what you made with A Letter from the Front in collaboration with Giulia. Giulia, how can we continue? I mean, we could continue for hours, but maybe it's almost the time to...
Yeah, exactly. It's time to wrap up. I would like us to take in from this, Andrea, because like this, and adding just another consideration, and maybe we can open then if there are questions from the public, if Nikita agrees. The fact that you were, Nikita, discussing about some parts of the body who are more exposed, but on the flip side, they are more marginal. And so there's the idea of marginality that is connected to the geography, that it's something that is recurrent in your research as well, in your statements, is very related to me, or it resonates to me to another notion. So there is this notion of marginality, liminality, but there is also this notion of catastrophe, because if something happens and it's something catastrophic, as a work can be, it seems to, at first it seems to be always at the edges, at the margins, and so sometimes we tend to ignore or trying to shut an eye on this and not trying to reflect properly, because it's something that doesn't touch us, it doesn't affect our bodies, as we were saying, right? But a catastrophe is something that in fact it afflicts relationships, it afflicts the social sphere, and this is something that of course you pinpointed in your works, but also other artists featured in the work in A Letter from the Front did. I'm thinking about the statement that Lana Nanochenechka in Switch on Red says when she says, I propose that we try to place ourselves inside the catastrophe, so inside the things that we consider marginal, and think about finding ways of how we can speak about from the position of being within and not being outside. And again, this notion of catastrophic and mundane is coming back in Labor Safety by Revchomsky and Raczynski. So what is the catastrophe according to you? It's a very provocative question, but I would like to ask about this and then maybe wrap up.
Somehow I understand these questions of people who ask like why there are works from last 5 or last 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe this choice of work helps to understand what Ukraine is. It touches so different contexts of Ukrainian life, and there is always some grain of catastrophe growing inside. Like I guess in each work of there is certain like premonition of a big catastrophe. Nevertheless, these works are so different and they are about so different things. There is a grain of catastrophe growing in each of them. And in fact, catastrophe is so like ambiguous thing. On one hand, it would attacks us when we don't expect. It's like some stones falling on our head, and we just fear that it's so not in time that it just mustn't happen. On the other hand, it's about finding a real ourselves. When we just wake up from some sleeping of normality, of normalized everyday life, and find that actually we are something very different. Yeah, it's a terrible wake up. Maybe we all would prefer to go to sleep again. But even if you succeed to overcome the catastrophe and to survive, you will never be like you were before. It's something really transforming personality and transforming all your like subjectivity. Yeah.
It is very, very hard to ask anything about everything you said now, because these are terrifying words. You mentioned work and personal posture and premonitions. Can you guess? Do you have any feeling or any premonition about what's awaiting in next weeks, or not yet? What is your feeling? What do you think?
wouldn't like to play this role of prophet or like oracle or thing, but I have to say that this story is for long. Now they say about some epic battle for Donbass, but battle for Donbass goes on since the spring of 2014. But definitely, if Putin came saying that he wants to protect this land and these people from Ukraine, he brings something terrible to this land and these people. I traveled to Donbass since autumn 2014. We had a first travel together with a brilliant Ukrainian writer and photographer, Evgenia Belorusets. And since that time, I traveled each year. I collaborated with local historical museums. Like we launched some cultural projects there, like reconstruction of biotechnosphere by brilliant Ukrainian cosmist and ecologist artist Fedor Tetianich from 80s. We had to produce new biotechnosphere in Popasna in this year. So I traveled there a lot. I was there when theme of the war in the east of Ukraine was so popular, so visible in Western media. And I was there when Western world forgot about it totally. When war in Ukraine went out of fashion. So then February 24 came as a sort of surprise for European people. Lots of them called it like a start of the war in Ukraine, of the war which went on for 8 years before. So this story is for long. And Putin brings terrible things to Donbass. We have seen Bucha or Borodyanka or Mariupol. And I don't want to, like frighten you and to create like additional dramatic effect, but we have seen how things work with these people, with this army, with this state. I hope that Europe and that world will join. Now it's really time to stop this machine of killing. Just has to be stopped. Not like negotiated for maybe some temporary agreements, because they will be broken next day. But just practical stopping of Putin, his army, and his state machine, which turned to a machine of killing.
Sounds even more dramatic than what we would have expected. I guess there is some understanding. I don't know what your position is towards someone like Sergei Lonitsa, but there has been some understanding about the situation in Donbass in Europe. I completely agree with you. It's perhaps not known and not understood that it's 8 years now, about to be 9 years, that the situation is terrifying. But there is clearly and there was an understanding of something completely unbalanced and terrifying. And what else can we say than not trying to keep continuing this form of protection, as you mentioned, and support, and perhaps kinship, and perhaps also sense of never giving up in raising the emergency that is a state of mind, but also a state of bodies, and is led by someone that definitely needs to be removed in a way or another. So we can only be supportive and can only be thankful to you for your commitment, for your choices, for your words, for your approach to life, and for your, let's say, serious and deep, open-minded way of sharing what needs to be shared. And we can only be thankful to Giulia and Caroline and everyone who in institution manages and is keen on finding different ways of being active, be involved, even if being remote or not directly connected. So perhaps Giulia, you will close, but I just wanted to thank you, because this is the most important we can do to be all together in this catastrophe.
Exactly. I mean, Andrea, thank you for this. I would like once again to thank Nikita and all the artists, because it's just thanks to you as well that we can expand more and getting a better vision and perspective on what is happening, what has been happening, because as you said, Nikita, it didn't start on February. It's a lasting, tremendous situation that you have experiencing. And so your generosity is a kind of generative process for us as institutions, because it reminds us the urgence of expanding, on echoing your voices. We are trying our best to do so, and we do hope that we are succeeding with you, and thanks to you on doing this. So thanks again for being with us today, despite all your commitments, and thanks to Andrea and your institution, wonderful institution, and thanks to Caroline and Castello di Rivoli. I'm an ambassador today, and so hope to speak soon with you, and with in a better, slightly better situation, let's say, so dancing with the catastrophe instead of only discussing about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao Nikita. Ciao
Goodbye.
Andrea.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.